Well, welcome to the 9th edition of ScottCast, the podcast. Thanks a lot for checking us out. And for those of you that have been following us for a while, thank you for returning.
All 7 of you.
That's right. I'm Michael Clark, sitting here with Scott Brown. And I thought we'd talk about one of the topics we've been getting a ton of calls into the financial planning practice on, and that is the market. Obviously, the market's been, I would say, kind of all over the place. And I would say that the news has also been right along there with it, all over the place.
Yeah, I don't think that's a coincidence.
Right.
I think that one plays into the other, I suppose. It's the headlines you people in our business joke about. If the market's up, they'll say, "Oh, market rose today." If the market's down, the market collapsed.
Right. Yes.
It's funny the adjectives they like to use. Like they're all bored sitting around. Well, I've got this hideous adjective. Where do I fit this in here somewhere? So, it's the old adage, and it's cliche at this point, but bad news sells.
Sure.
And it is said that in the human mind, we experience disappointment at twice the level we experience happiness, right? So when we're unhappy or frightened, market's down 7% versus market down up 8%, the feeling is not the same. You
Sure.
don't experience the same level of joy, for lack of a better word, when the market's up 7 as you do pain when it's down 7. You experience the down twice as heavily. And there are evolutionary reasons for that. I joke in my book.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. I joke in my book that, there's an evolutionary reason because you had to know about bad news. If you went into your cave at night, Michael, and you saw a saber-toothed tiger, if you didn't freak out about that and tell everybody, you wouldn't be sitting here, right?
Yeah.
Your ancestors would not have survived. But when it comes to investing, it's not a particularly helpful thing.
Yeah. And I feel like, well, maybe it's always this way, but I feel like right now there's a ton of reasons to say, hey, should I sell? And the election's about a year and a half away. Obviously, the inverted yield curve. I've heard more about that than I care to
Not the
hear.
inverted yield curve.
We got tariffs, trade deals. We got all sorts of different headlines that are passing over our desk, but also the clients are seeing these on the news and in magazines. And so it makes sense that a logical person would say, shouldn't I sell my investments and wait for this thing to get better?
Well, luckily for our clients, I'm not that logical. So that's the good news. No, it does make a lot of sense to be concerned by these things in the headlines. I try to convince clients not to read those things, but that's easier said than done. Of course, they're going to read them. But yes, your emotional reactions to things, visceral reactions to bad news or potentially bad news is normal. But the one thing I would say to people is if it's already in the newspaper and it's common knowledge, the general public believes something to be bad or potentially be bad, more often than not, it's not going to be, because it's never the thing we're all sitting there worrying about that happens, right? Most things we worry about never actually happen. That's my good buddy Tom Petty, right? So the thing that you're reading in the newspaper that some, no offense, 27 or 28-year-old reporter who has $18 in their checking account is writing about, no offense, is likely not to be the problem. If they figured it out, that's probably the wrong thing to have figured out.
Right. And I found a statistic you're really going to like. So, and I'll read it just so I get it correct. So 40% of 226 economists were surveyed. So 40% of the 226 economists that were surveyed in the summer believe that we'd fall into a recession by the year 2020. Next year. Mm-hmm. While the remaining 60% believe that it'll be in 2021 or later.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Pretty vague.
Or later.
So I'll rephrase it. So just under 50% of the economists surveyed believe we'll be in a recession by the year 2020. And then just over the 50% think it'll occur after 2021.
Yeah.
So I don't know how helpful that is.
So there's a consensus of non-consensus.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So somebody's hoping to write a book. Again, did I mention my book? Somebody's hoping to write a book because if they're accidentally right, then they can ride that for the next 20 years, no matter how wrong they are following that. Economists and analysts and research people, they're necessary. They're helpful, I suppose, in some ways, but they have no more ability than most quote unquote average people to predict when a recession's coming, because we're all sitting around going, the recession's coming, the recession's coming, the recession's coming. Probably the recession won't come, right? It's when we're all, yay, everything's great. It's the roaring 20s. We're dancing and wearing silly clothes and funny hats with feathers in them. And then the recession gets us, right?
Right.
Because we didn't know it was coming.
Yeah. Well, I know a whole bunch of people were flipping houses in 2005,
Sure.
making a whole
Can't
bunch of
miss.
money, and
Yeah.
did not see that coming.
It's when people say something is a can't miss or the good times
Right.
are never going to end that I get nervous. When everybody's walking around like Eeyore in Winnie the Pooh, oh, woe is me, or Chicken Little that the sky's going to fall. We got some 20-somethings, they don't even know who Chicken Little is. But the truth of the matter is that if you're walking around woe is me and worried about something, the odds of that thing being the thing are not particularly high.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I would say, logical to look at the news and say, hey, should I get out of this thing's way? However, you create two sets of problems. One is, are you getting out at the right time?
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you got out a little bit ago, the market could be up or down.
Mm-hmm.
And over short-term periods of time, the market could really go anywhere. So you're creating the first problem is, did I get out at the right time? And then you create a second problem of, well, when do you put that cash back in?
Exactly.
When do you get back in? And you got to get them both right.
Yes, you have to get them both right. And in December of this past year is a great example. I mean, the S&P was down, I don't know, 15, 20%. And certainly there were people that were, heck, I was nervous.
Right,
you know, I'm just as human as anybody else for the most part. So the truth of the matter is that we all get nervous at those times. But is it 1929 or is it December of 2018? There's no way to know that. People who claim they know those things are the ones that scare me the most.
Right. And you've done a lot of speaking and writing on figuring out how much risk you should take. Because I feel like a lot of people look at what I just described. Oh, should I get out or should I stay in the market? And they look at it like, all right, should I be 100% in stocks or should I be 100% in money market? But you've spent a lot of time educating people on, well, figure out how much risk you actually need to take to accomplish your goals.
Yeah, it's and in that mentality, which is the all or nothing, I'm in or I'm out, or I'm out or I'm in, or Scott, you'll tell me when to get in or get no, I won't. What I will tell you is how much risk you have to take, right? So how do you know that? Well, I use the same stupid example every time. Guy walks into my office with $1 million, says I need $20,000 a year in income. Well, we can all do the math. That's 2% a year, right? So what that person has just told me is they don't need to take a lot of risk. 2%, okay, CDs aren't quite paying that, so we might have to take a little bit of risk.
Sure.
But we don't have to take a lot. It would be malpractice on my part to try to earn that person 10%. They just told me they need to earn 2%. Right? Now, conversely, and that could be a young person, right? Because people are all caught up in how old you are and subtract your age from something, and that gives you, that's just nonsense, right? Yeah. Conversely, an older person could walk in my office, a 70-year-old with $1 million, and they could say, I need $90,000 a year to live on.
Yeah.
Now, we can do the math on that too, right?
Right.
That's 9%. That person cannot, I repeat, cannot be conservative. Their only hope is to earn a return that's superior to generally what the S&P brings.
Right.
So, yes, I might tell them that some of their money needs to go into lottery tickets because that's where and that all goes back to one thing, right? I've said this many times. The amount of risk you need to take is directly proportionate to the previous risk and discipline you've had before, right? So if you saved enough to not take a lot of risk, like my first person, then don't. If you haven't, the consequences of the second person are they have to take more risk. Doesn't mean they won't be successful. It just means it's a tougher hill to climb.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people get mixed up in that. Right. Well, no, Scott, tell me, is Apple better than Google right now?
Well, and it's also proportionate to their buddy at a cocktail party bragging about what they earned on some stock or something, right? Well, I heard Jim say you earned 15%. So in their head, they've glommed onto that 15%. They've anchored, if you will, to that 15%. And now they're coming to me to try to earn them 15% when we all know Jim was drunk and he was making up the story anyway. So again, everything needs context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people look at, especially the media and a lot of the headlines, and they try to figure out how they should invest based upon that.
Yeah.
And you've seen I think, more mistakes on that from clients than maybe anything.
Well, yeah. So I won't name any magazine names, but you see them at the checkout counter,
Sure.
right? And it's the top 100 mutual funds from 2018. So of course you naturally open it up and you're like, oh, 1 through 10. I'll just buy 1 through 10.
Right.
They were the best. They're going to continue to be the best, right? Statistically, no, they're not.
Right.
Right? You would think, well, if that were true, if that was the way to go, then the same funds or stocks or whatever it is would be in the top 10 every year, but they're not, right? Actually, statistically, it's more likely the ones at the bottom of the list will move to the top of the list because we know the economy is cyclical.
Sure.
From transportations to industrials to pharmaceuticals and back and forth again. So this idea of chasing, which is built into our reptile brains, is very counterproductive when it comes to investing.
Yeah, even when you tell me some of the names from like the 80s and even early 90s, I've never heard of them. They're not around anymore.
Yeah, older advisors like that are my age or older, we have funds that we joke about,
right?
Because they were the darlings in 1999, and they're gone. They're just simply gone. Where did they go? Well, nobody knows.
Yeah.
So no, it's a bad strategy.
Yeah. So I mean, don't let the media scare you. Now is not a good time to sell. I mean, I think that's what most of the calls have been centered around. Oh, should I completely sell my investments and wait?
Yeah, but what are you waiting for?
Right.
You theoretically, at least I know in our practice, theoretically, you have already built a portfolio that has risk in it and hedges built into it, whether that's cash or that's bonds or whatever it is, hedge funds in and of themselves, right? Who knows what you're using, but you should have already built in, I call them floaties, right? Everybody wants to jump into the deep end of the pool. Some people don't swim so well, right? So we put floaties on those people so that they don't get as beat up in a downturn in equity markets, right? Because there's all kinds of markets. First of all, typically what we've seen this year is pretty much all the markets are up because interest rates have worked out going down and bond prices have come up. So again, you should have already thought that through. That process should be in place. If your process involves reading the newspaper and reacting, it's likely not to work out very well.
Right. Absolutely. So again, my name is Michael Clarkson here with Scott Brown. Scott, you want to tell us a little bit more about the book?
Shameless plug. I never made anybody rich, which seems like a terrible marketing idea. But it's a series of stories from 32 years in the business that some writings I had done and then I added to. There's an anecdote in here for just about everything. That person in your life that's doing this dumb thing with their money, there's probably something in here about it. Or you're making mistakes or confused about things or the media or whatever. I try to be super honest in this book, which was hard getting it published because it's a little frank in places. But I've spent a lot of time working on it. Hopefully it's helpful to somebody. So you can find it on Amazon. There's your shameless plug.
Perfect. Well, sounds good. Well, if you have an idea for a future show, you can reach out to us. Our website's a great reference for that. It's huronpartners.com. Again, on behalf of Scott and myself, Michael, thanks a lot for checking out the 8th or 9th edition of ScottCast, the podcast. Make sure you catch the next one. And again, you can learn more about us at huronpartners.com.
And thanks to Ashley.
There you go.